Joining me now for another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show, with the Knicks headed back on the road to the city of brotherly love, a division rival where they finally get to take on the Sixers, even though we've been seeing the Bucks and the Celtics so many times this year. We get to finally take on the third best team potentially in the Eastern Conference, although we'll find out if he thinks they're the third best team. From the legendary Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast, please welcome for the first time ever to Knicks Film School, Mr. Spike Eskin. Spike, how you doing, man?
Great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start with vibes, because it's been fascinating to watch from afar, the Sixers season. I mean, honestly, it starts in training camp when obviously all the drama with James and with whether a trade was going to happen. And Maxey gets off to the start he gets off to the uneducated Knicks fan that obviously doesn't have the Sixers fan perspective. Is this the best possible case scenario that could have happened for the Sixers, where it was like so clear that they could survive without James Harden? The pieces they got for him actually became part of the solution. And then, of course, Joel somehow taking a leap after an MVP season.
I think it's better than whatever the best possible scenario we could have imagined. I think one of the reasons that everyone who has watched the team for years is having such a good time this year, I think, is because everyone imagined a much, much worse case scenario, you know, not so much that it would be bad post Harden, because I think just about everybody was ready, not everybody, but a large portion of the fan base was ready to move on from Harden. But the way that it was evolving, I think a lot of us thought that he could be there for the first couple of months of the season, that he could play and make it ugly, that, you know, like a lot of bad things. And our perspective was, at least from when you're watching and thinking about it and talking about it every day, is how could the vibe within the team be good and be positive with this going on in the outside? But I think what we learn is being on the outside of it and podcasting about it every day, and being on the inside and actually having teammates and going to work every day. It's just different, you know? And I think it was probably more toxic for us than it was for the team, which I think you give a lot of credit to Nurse and a lot of credit to Embiid and, you know, the internal leadership of the team to keep them focused. So that's a long answer, but I honestly could not have imagined a better scenario than what is happening. I think you could have, all the things that you mentioned, I think we could have imagined. We could have imagined Maxey getting better. We could have even imagined Embiid getting better. We could have imagined the pieces they got back from Harden being part of the solution. But all of the things happening and them not even really missing a beat is pretty much unimaginable.
Well, so to add to it, that everybody's happy with the situation, that a team without James Harden is not only a better team potentially, but also that everybody enjoys watching that team better, which is you mentioned the role of a niche podcaster, and like we're doing it every day. It's almost like we get to be part of the oral history as it's being written.
It's one of the coolest things about doing this, right? Like
exactly. Yeah.
When people ask me for the history of it, there are books about like the process or whatever, but if you just listen to our pod through the years, there it is. You know, you can relive it. It's one of the coolest things about doing it is that there's a history written about what all of those things, not just what happened, but what they felt like. Anyway, I think it's one of the coolest things about doing this.
Well, so from our perspective in New York, and we really go back to the first Thibodeau year where like Knicks Film School found any kind of footing, and it's funny how these things run together, where that first year, it's like surpassing all expectations, getting the 4 seed, and then losing in the first round. Yeah. And then the next year, it falls off a cliff. Randall's horrible. And it's like they're the 11 seed. They missed the playoffs. Everyone fired or traded. And then they sign Jalen Brunson. They don't get Donovan Mitchell. And then they extend RJ. And then going into the next year, it's like, when do they fire the head coach? But then he makes a rotation change and the vibes become immaculate until they get Josh Hart and they get even better and they get to the second round. And with this season, it was starting to feel like 2 years ago where it's like something's off. Like, is this just going to be a replay of 2 years earlier? And, you know, the OG Anunoby trade, I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm going to miss Emmanuel quickly. And then there's a complicated relationship to RJ Barrett and Knicks fans. but the juice that's been punched into this season, it feels like the Derrick Rose trade or the Josh Hart trade. I say all of that because you mentioned James coming here and making a mess potentially this year, and that being the fear. You guys have experience with that, with what Ben Simmons did a couple years ago. Was that the fear coming into this year that this was going to be a replay of a couple years ago and look, I narrowed it down to one, I promise you, one question about the Knicks and the connection of Joel and
sure.
potentially, but with that looming of a potential, ask out this summer, the fact that it went the other direction, was that the fear, though, that was the direction it was headed?
Well, I think there's a difference between everybody else's fear or not everybody else. I was never afraid of that. Okay. And I've argued, the only time my Philliness ever comes out at WFAN is when I'm arguing with Knicks fans at work. And you could ask them, and it's on the pod. Joel to me does not seem like the sort of player who is asking out for a number of different reasons. One of them I mentioned is the inconvenience of doing it. I don't know if he has the stomach for it to be hated the way that he would be hated in Philadelphia. I also don't think he doesn't even have an agent currently, and which also means that has to be really sort of motivated by you, if that were to happen. And I also think, and this isn't what you asked me, but I'm just sort of clarifying what my stance was on it. That was not, there were plenty of worries to me, but him asking out was not on the list of worries. Another thing that is kind of strange is that when you think about the history of players asking out in the NBA, is thus far, it's not been foreign-born players, really. It's always been American-born players, which I don't know if there's a cultural thing that is different there, but all of those factors led me to believe that he was not asking out. I think in general, the bigger fear, if we're to put that one to the side, and there were people that were afraid of that, is if this gets ugly, what does he do? I think the bigger fear is just a waste of his prime. A year of his prime is if this year is a disaster, is gone. It's not a wasted year of his prime if they don't win a championship, but it is a wasted year of his prime if there's no growth, if we don't find something out new about the team. And I think the thing that everyone was super worried about was just this is going to be a complete throwaway, that this year would just get ugly and stupid, sort of like the 1920 year when they signed Horford and they traded for Josh Richardson, and the team was just miserable. And that year's almost erased from Sixers fan memory because it was such a disaster. And I think that was more of the fear than he was going to ask out. I just don't, maybe I'm blind fan thing, but I don't really think he's an ask out guy.
Look, I guess we'll just have the Embiid conversation now. Sure. That Embiid conversation.
Yeah.
From everything I've heard, and we're really close with Fred Katz of the Athletic. He's reported this, and we've talked to some people. It's consistent with what you're saying that he wants to be a Philly lifer, and when Embiid the Knicks, unfortunately, the way the Knicks are talked about nationally is who are they trading for? What can take them to be a contender, and not how they're playing, what they've done. And Embiid's name, because of the CAA connection, gets brought up. I think the fear you're talking about wasting his prime would have been the only way I could have talked myself into that changing, that it's they're wasting my prime.
Yeah.
And if that were to happen, that's a thing I could see happening. But as we now transition into what the Sixers are doing,
and by the way, not an unreasonable thing. As soon as Leon Rose went to the Knicks, I'm sure I said it on the podcast many times, and I'm sure I communicated to people, oh no, you can draw that line, and clearly you can draw it with OG, and there's not. It's not a crazy line to draw, but for that sort of player to force his way to one specific team who happens to be 80 miles away from the other team, who happens to be in the same division. Like, this is a pretty messy situation for him to get himself into. So anyway, leave that there. But it's not a crazy thought to have, I don't think.
You bring up the foreign-born part of it, which is why I'm hesitant on Luka ever asking out. I was kind of hesitant on Giannis, but then he went like on a press tour this summer about he might leave in 2 years. But I think it was more to put pressure on the Bucks to make sure they do something else. And then obviously they got Dame Lillard. As far as what the Sixers have done this year in that best case scenario, number 1 in net rating, Maxi's taking a leap. I was looking at Nick Batum's on-off since he got traded, and it's insane.
Yeah,
like he leads the team in on-off at the moment on a year that Joel Embiid is, my goodness, the December he just had going averaging 40
points,
and 10.
I think. Yeah.
So from my outside perspective, he's taken a leap because obviously because these two teams play at the same time a lot, I haven't been able to watch him every night, especially if I tune in for the fourth quarter. He's usually not playing because they're up by so much. What would you say is the biggest difference between him this year compared to last year where he won the MVP? And I'll add a caveat, like, is it really just as simple as he's passing more? Because that assist percentage is kind of nuts.
Yes. I mean, it's certainly one of the things is he said, I made fun of him in the offseason because he made there was a comment Ramona Shelburne made about how, because she's always been she's obviously close to him or someone around him. And she said, he watches Jokic play and wonders, why can't they play like that? And I laughed and I was like, bro, there's nobody stopping you from passing. Like, I don't know what you're doing, what you're thinking, but if you have the ability and somebody's telling you not to, we should address that. And he's always had very bad, if it appears to us, very bad instincts on passing. He's always been a beat late, and like, especially on double teams, he's always a beat late. He waits till the double team gets there. And it is different this year. And you have to obviously attribute to some of it to Nick Nurse. I think you have to attribute some of it to Harden not being there, because a lot of the offense ran through Harden last year. And if the offense is running through Harden, then Joel was on when you think about the way he got his points last year, he was on the receiving end of a lot of that, pick and roll, the pick and pop action with him and Harden. So I give credit to Nurse. I give credit to Embiid to buying in and moving the ball. But also the Sixers have never had other good passers on the aside from Harden, like ball movers, like you mentioned, Batum. And Batum has, I think, made a significant difference just in the flow of the offense. Because if you're going to move the ball, sometimes you're not going to get the assist, but you want the ball to keep moving. Like, you want there to be a point to you moving the ball. And I think having players like that on the floor have helped him as well. So I think it's a lot of things. And offense, I think as far as scoring, he just looks like he's like mastered it. Like it looks like he can do it whenever he wants to do it. Now, I'm sure you'll play this clip when in the second round, he shoots 7 for 24 and the Sixers go down 3-1. And I'm saying he's mastered offense. But at this point, and I think Anthony Edwards said it, he said, I don't know how they ever lose, like watching him play. And this year, the passing is unreal, but he has also, from a scoring standpoint, just realized that if I do this, they're going to have to do that, and then I'll get this. Like, it's almost like they're playing 4-on-5, and he just has to make the right move, and he'll have a shot that he can make. Like him shooting a 14 to 16 footer, he doesn't miss any of them. It feels like he shoots 85% of them on them. So, and I think that has energized him defensively. I think he's always been, I actually think it got to a point where he was an underrated defender because he wasn't as dominant as he used to be, but he's a defender that you can build an entire defense around. Like, Giannis is a great defensive player, but that defense is not built around Giannis. That defense is built around Brook Lopez and before was Brook Lopez and Drew Holiday, which sort of allowed Giannis to sort of roam around, get steals, get blocks, yada, yada, yada. He's not a center. He's not like a cornerstone of a defense, and Joel is, but he's played like up another level in that way too.
Well, so in the couple Sixers games that I've caught this year, it's almost similar to what Minnesota's doing with with Gobert, where they're not just strictly using him as a rim protector. It seems like they're bringing him up to the elbow, bringing him up to the nail, and he's almost like a paint protector. And it's just widening his range of defense. It's almost like here in New York, Darrelle Revis, like you're going to Joel Island when you go anywhere near the paint. And that's I think the best compliment I could give him. As far as this matchup against the Knicks is concerned, not that anybody's had any success stopping him in the last couple months, but like not necessarily what scares you, but how would a team in your mind, or at least from what you've seen, have any teams that have given him trouble? Like Isaiah Hartenstein is currently an Knicks center, leads the league in shots on shots at the rim, blocked shots at the rim on dunks, in defensive EPM. Julius Randle's a big body. Like, what has he struggled with, if anything, this year?
Well, so historically, what he has struggled with is either one, like a lot of chaos, like double teams and just like a lot of movement and making him make quick decisions. He's always looked terrible against the Raptors, you know? And then the other sort of guys historically, it's not all of them because, you know, he'll get 4 fouls on Andre Drummond in 2 minutes, but big, sturdy, smart bodied defenders. So, you know, Horford is one of those. Marc Gasol was one of those that always frustrated him back in the day. Now you're talking about two really incredible defensive players too. It's not just a body type. He would even like struggle against Valanciunas. So I think the goal for Embiid, and he even mentioned that Nick Nurse told him this, that the Raptors used to do this, is to make him frustrated because he makes bad decisions and forces things when he's frustrated. And that's when if he turns the ball over a couple of times and decides to try to bully his way into a basket and ends up on the floor and doesn't get the call and misses a layup, and you know, you guys are on the other end with a fast break layup and he's yelling at the refs, like that's what you want out of Embiid. But you know, you mentioned him skipping fourth quarters. One of the things that the Sixers have not done historically, which is so weird to see their point differential where it is to just like obliterate teams that they should obliterate and have him sit fourth quarters. And that is a different thing about him and them. So that's what I would do. I guess I would try to hassle him. I think what he'll probably try to do to Hartenstein is get 2 fouls on him in the first 2 minutes. And that would, I think, like that's going to be the goal, is to, you know, neutralize his defender and make him think about everything that he's doing. And I think that the Knicks should do that. And the other thing defensively the Knicks can do that teams have started doing with Maxey is putting sort of like bigger wing guys on him because he's compact and smaller, and good defenders that are longer and can move their feet seem like they can stay with him a little bit better. I wouldn't be surprised to see OG on Maxey, like in spurts, and there has been some success with that too. So
that's what I was going to wonder, the OG Anunoby matchup, or the assignment, I should say. When Anunoby came here, we did a podcast with S. Barahini up in Toronto. He mentioned Embiid's stopper as one of the, or maybe it was the Giannis stopper, but that he guards bigger than his position. Yeah. And I wondered if the Knicks would try to, like you said, frustrate Embiid by switching OG onto him a few times, or bringing OG as the double, as well as getting the Maxey assignment, which I'm curious if that's where Josh Hart ends up going, or Quentin Grimes getting some look at Maxey. I'm very fascinated by this matchup, and like the Knicks obviously with a new look to them, and their second unit is a bit frustrating at the moment, but their starting five has looked amazing.
Well, and the second unit thing is about not having
it's literally the spark off the bench that they have is no longer there anymore. Like hopefully you could find that at the deadline. You mentioned what Nick Nurse has contributed to Joel's game, and I'm assuming that that's across the board what he's contributed to everybody. In the past couple of years, it's been a lot of pick and roll, especially with Harden and Embiid. What would you say to obviously our Knicks fans that he's contributed the most as far as the improvement this year?
We have a couple of people who write for the Rights to Ricky website, and one is this guy, Dan Olinger, and he wrote a really good article this past week about how the best thing that Nurse has done is made the Sixers less predictable. especially on offense, that he adjusts and that Doc Rivers did not. Now, I'm no fan of Doc Rivers here, but I think when your two main offensive pieces are Harden and Embiid, that sort of limits the amount of creativity that you can have, especially with Harden, who is just will tell you to your face that he is not interested in experimenting or doing anything different or working off the ball or any of those things. But he has shown a propensity Nick Nurse has to adjust, to be less predictable. It makes things simply just like easier for the Sixers because the opponent doesn't seem to know what's coming. And I think Nurse has grown a little bit too. One of the things that's been interesting to watch with Nick Nurse is that when he was in Toronto, he had, which you're familiar with, in New York, he had a very short rotation and he would play guys 38, 40 minutes all the time. And it seems like Nurse, even as a coach with lineups and with rotations, has been experimenting and trying to figure things out himself. And we'll be like, well, why is this guy playing all of a sudden? Or why did this guy get run over this guy? And he's been figuring that out as well. So I think the thing that he has brought that has been a breath of fresh air has just been change and consistent change and a lack of predictability.
So speaking of lineups, this Maxey, Melton, Harris, Batum, Embiid lineup that's plus 33, that's terrifying. I don't even have a question. That's just a terrifying lineup right there. Like, is that how they've been winning? Just when that lineup plays, they build up leads?
Well, the time to attack the Sixers, Embiid plays the entire first quarter and the entire third quarter.
Okay.
And then he sits from, the beginning of the second quarter till about the 6-minute mark of both. So, or even the 5-minute mark. So the lineups that just have Maxey have not been particularly strong, at least like as far as this season goes. So that is the time, Maxey goes out around the 4-minute mark of the first quarter. So
real quick, you're saying he staggers. One of Embiid or Maxey is on the court at all times.
Yeah, just about.
Okay.
Yeah, just about. So the time to it, that sounds sort of like elementary, but the time to attack is when Embiid isn't on the bench. And by the way, like even the Embiid without Maxey lineups have not looked great. Like the Sixers are a ball handler short right now, which I guess the Knicks are to a certain extent too. Pat Beverly has actually been much better than I thought he has, but he's not like a super offensive creator guy. They could use a real bench scorer / point guard, ball handler, combo guard guy. And I think that shows when Maxey's not on the court, and the lack of scoring punch when Embiid isn't on the court, when it's just Maxey has been an issue sometimes.
Who do you want?
As far as like a player?
Yeah, because I just did a Bulls pod because the Knicks just played the Bulls, and the Zach LaVine conversation came up.
Yeah.
I follow the Right Sturkey Sanchez on Instagram, and I saw you ask Daryl not to trade for Zach LaVine. So I'm assuming that's not who you want. But if you're just looking for a ball handler, like what's the list? What's the wish list?
We do a segment on every pod called Star Hunter, where we just sort of like go through players in the league that we might want. Mm-hmm. It's really difficult to decide. The Sixers are in so Mike tends to, my partner tends to think about, oh yes, he was on, you're right. Mm-hmm. So Mike tends to think about the players that he wants. I tend to wait to see what they get and decide whether I like it or not. So the LaVine thing, I've actually gone back and forth on. The thing that the thing that I didn't want Daryl to do, and it was actually the thing that you were talking about was Andrew Underberger, another one of our writers, wrote an article that the Sixers can't trade for an excuse this year. And what he was essentially saying was like, if we trade for Zach LaVine, look, we all know he has no history of winning in the playoffs, whether it's his fault or not. We all know that the Bulls seem to have gotten better when he's not on the court. And we all know that like we would talk ourselves into it, but there would be something that would be nagging at us that would say that it isn't the right move. And then in the playoffs, when it becomes clear that it's not the right move, we would just say, oh, they shouldn't have traded for Zach LaVine. And like, I think overall, I think my answer is just like, I want this year to be about Maxey and Embiid. So I don't really know who the guy is. We've talked about Bogdan Bogdanović a lot, whether he becomes available in Atlanta. Mike has mentioned DeJounte Murray. I don't like DeJounte Murray at all. I know you guys have talked about him. I think he's like one of those players that there's like this conceptual version of DeJounte Murray. And then when you watch him, it's this other sort of thing. In your head, he's like Drew Holiday. He's great at defense and he can play off ball and blah, blah, blah. And you watch him and he's kind of like, you can tell he wants to be a ball hog and he doesn't really defend like you think he does, even though his body looks like he does.
Yeah. My take on DeJounte Murray, if you're just getting him because you want to go star hunting eventually and you need a good contract and a lead guy along with all your picks, then I get it.
Yeah.
If you were going to pay a second point guard on your team $24 million, how about you could just pay to Immanuel Quickley? And
right.
that could have been like, we'd have no issues right now if Immanuel Quickley was also your starting two guard and your backup point guard at the moment. And he was just getting DeJounte Murray's usage. If the whole point of trading Quickley was to like, now you've given Jalen Brunson the point guard spot.
Yeah.
Now go get a backup point guard. At least that's my thought on Murray. Like I get what he can do well. I also think we tried the 2 point guard experiment.
Right. And by the way, like it's not, when you think about pairing him with Trae Young, like again, it's that concept. It's like, okay, well, we have a little scoring point guard. So we'll put him with a bigger, more athletic guy who can defend and it will work. But it just isn't working there.
Right.
You know what I mean? So Bogdanović seems like a player that could be had, that would fit what they needed, who would have the guts to score in the playoffs. You know, there's one guy, he's not a ball handler per se, but man, I fall in love watching Cam Johnson on the Nets.
Yeah.
I would love Cam Johnson, man. He doesn't fit the ball handler thing, but really once the playoffs come along, Maxey's gonna, be playing 42 minutes a game anyway. So I don't know how much that matters. I would love Cam Johnson too. And I know he has years and the Sixers were more interested in having, a clean cap sheet over the offseason, but he's young. He's on the same timeline as Embiid. What's Cam Johnson's like 26, 27 years old. So
I would argue if you're trying to keep your cap sheet clean, it would be to sign a player like Cam Johnson.
Right.
You. So him taking up that necessary cap room is kind of perfect for what the Sixers. I mean, you mentioned two guys that are just great off ball, and if the Sixers passing is what it is already with a pretty elite offense, I mean that it's a move that makes sense to me, at least if those are the guys you're targeting. I think the Knicks fans, what we've targeted, it's this list of like 5 where it's like Tyus Jones and Malcolm Brogdon and like pick a backup point guard that could potentially come here.
I would say that the thing about Malcolm Brogdon is every fan base, every time he leaves a team, the fan base is like, oh, thank God he's gone. And there's some weird vibe about that guy.
Because he doesn't play though, right? Like it's usually...
I don't think that's it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's it. I'll ask my Bucks friend Ben specifically my Bucks fan friend Ben specifically what it is. But I don't know. I think there's something wrong with Brogdon, and I don't want him.
Well,
so,
I've my top of my wish list is Tyus Jones. The fact that he could end up on a Tibbs team again would be hilarious, but the fact that he has experience playing for Tibbs, and there probably won't be like any politics involved if he ends up playing 12 minutes in a playoff game, whereas like Malcolm Brogdon only played 12 minutes tonight. It's like, oh, well, what is this then? I think you could get away with it better with Tyus Jones. Couple questions before I let you get out of here. I like to hand the show over at a certain point to my guest and say, like, you have any Knicks questions or thoughts? And I know, like, you also have another job where you run the most successful sports radio station in New York ever, But if you want to our audience, give your Knicks thoughts and what they've done this year, or even specifically the Anunoby trade just happened, by all means, please do.
So one thing to note is I was like a Knicks fan until my mid 20s.
Okay.
I grew up, I'm 47. So John Starks is like my hero. You can't see it, but there's like a giant John Starks poster here on my wall here.
Is it the dunk?
No. So I have the dunk. I have an autographed the dunk at my office, and also the cover of Slam he was on in my office. This one is, I think I can tell the story. Kate Fagan, who used to cover the Sixers and wrote for ESPN and was a great Colorado State basketball player, was a huge John Starks fan, and like created this poster for her and her dad. And she made me one, and I have that framed over here. So I'm a huge Starks fan, and I grew up a Knicks fan. So when I become a little trolly here, I want you to please, in your heart, so the first thing,
ultimate caveat. Go ahead, Spike.
The first thing is how is it going to feel when at the end of all of this maneuvering, you just end up with Karl Anthony Towns this offseason, and you just know, like in your heart, that it's not going to work.
Counterpoint. What if it ends with Donovan Mitchell? And he's in the best position he's ever been in his career.
With another small guard in the backcourt.
With OG Anunoby next to him this time, and with potentially Mitchell Robinson. And with your third best player is Julius Randle, I'd argue that's better than any situation that he's been in.
The same Donovan Mitchell who you saw like basically disappear for 5 straight games.
I'm not saying that there won't be worries with Donovan Mitchell. I'm just saying that in Jalen we trust. In Jalen Brunson. Okay,
so let me ask you a more reasonable question, because RJ Barrett's gone, and he was one of the players I used to argue about at work. I would just keep saying he sucks. He's never getting better.
Like, he doesn't come to the right pod then.
Yeah, like his total numbers would go up, but his no rate stat would ever get better with RJ Barrett. He would just do more of everything. Okay,
can I piggyback on that with just a stat to show you how well aware of his deficiencies we were?
Yeah.
So after that 7-game start he got off to, which was like he stole the Monstar's powers, right? He had that migraine bout when he came back, and it was 18 straight games where he had a 26 usage and a 43 effective field goal percentage. Nothing was that low over a full season since Kobe's last year in the league. So that's how bad he was. He was last year of his career Kobe, which good luck in Toronto. You went home, and I hope things work out for the best, but he was playing the worst basketball of his career when he got traded.
And by the way, like we talked about DeJounte Murray as like a conceptual player. RJ Barrett also conceptual, like 3-and-D guy who doesn't really shoot threes all that well. You mentioned high usage, like people who don't watch him all the time. Okay.
I swear, real quick, the number one thing everybody's been saying to me, and honestly, our commentary of it since seeing Anunoby, it's like, oh, this is what we wanted RJ to become. That's the number one like critique or even analysis of OG Anunoby so far, is this is a perfect fit in ways that RJ wasn't.
Was not, right.
So
I think the biggest question I have is, I have 2 questions, and I know we're going to go longer than this, will be my fault. So I have 2 questions. The first one is Julius Randle.
Okay.
So in my gut, again, don't watch every Knicks game, watch enough, hear enough of the conversation. In my gut, he is a loser. Like what he did, what he has done in the playoffs, the way that he reacted to fans, I can't imagine that like turning around. Knicks fans seem to feel that way every playoffs, and then by the middle of every season, they're fighting with me that he made an all-pro team. Shout out Anthony Gallo. He made an all-pro team. So what is your real belief on Julius Randle? Like in your heart, would you bet on him to come through when you need him to come through in the playoffs?
Right now, no. But I think that's the fascinating part about Julius's legacy in New York, is that, and this honestly has more to do with the Knicks and just what they've been as a franchise. It's like Patrick Ewing, Bernard King, some guys in the 60s and 70s, and Carmelo Anthony. Like that's their leaderboards right now. So Julius Randle climbing up a franchise's leaderboards says more about the franchise than it does about Julius Randle. Having said that, what's been interesting about these last 4 years in particular, that we hear team, that 4 seed, that he was the engine that made that thing run. He succeeded by hitting a ton of long twos and shooting 40% from 3. Last year, it was like playing off ball, being an honorable 3-point threat, where it was like, we have a specific zones we're allowed to shoot. It's at the rim or it's 3-pointers. And he was like Steph Curry, not efficiency, but on volume. He took and made a ton of threes last year. And like that was the way he got to 25 a game, 10 rebounds, and third team All NBA. This year, he's reinvented himself again. And he's just a bully ball with the 2-point ball. Like his efficiency in the paint, his efficiency at the rim has created a different version of him that I think Knicks fans are like, oh, because he's different, maybe it's going to be different. And I think, like, I don't like to make too many excuses, but like you probably know this, or I've heard this from Knicks fans. What happened against the Hawks was they said, okay, stop him, and we shut the water off. Like, there's nobody else that could beat us. And so it was a whole team dedicated to stopping one player, which we saw Halliburton struggle when teams started to do that. Last year, I don't want to give him too much of a pass, but he did sprain his ankle poorly because Bam Adebayo is an extremely dirty player.
Do you know why this is funny to me?
You're hearing the same excuses that
you sound like us talking about Embiid. Like it's essentially the same thing. Like, I
mean, you called Julius Randle a loser. They've both made it to the same point in the playoffs.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I just said the same thing. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I get it. So
real quick to finish the point, like, I'm with you that like he's got to eventually do it in the playoffs. I think the grace that I've started to extend him, at least this year, is like, man, the spacing has just been awful your entire time here. Like, we turned RJ Barrett into a corner 3-point shooter that first year, but since then it's just been like, you're just seeing nothing but bodies at the rim. I'm curious what a year with a 1 playoff run with OG Anunoby looks like, with Dante DiVincenzo, like with honorable 3-point shooters that he can kick out to, and obviously Jalen Brunson. It's one more run, and then if he's still like the worst high usage efficiency player in playoff history, then you might have to think, okay, this just has to be different next year. I don't care if he makes an all-star team, an all-NBA team. We have 3 different runs with this that it doesn't work.
Final question.
Sure.
Do you think a team could win a championship with Jalen Brunson as their best player?
No, but okay. I think you could win a championship with him as one of your best players. I know it's probably like a cop out of a political answer. Like,
well, you're saying second best, basically.
Yeah, like a 1A, but like there will be games where he is the best player.
Sure. You
know,
and
like
I like
Jamal Murray last year.
I love Jalen Brunson, by the way. Good, big Jalen Brunson guy. So not negative on him. Just curious.
The tough part with him being your best player is there are very clear weaknesses. He is taken advantage of on the defensive end of the floor. He can get a little foul baity at times. Where I think he just won us all over is in a playoff series with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo at the peak of their powers. Although Jimmy was hurt, but still playing well, he was the best player in the series. Like a team that was dedicated to trying to stop him, and he averaged over 30 a game. And that has just gone a long way with us to know, okay, we have a guy, like regardless of what he's bad at and, you know, how high the ceiling is when he's your best player, we have a guy. And the hope is Julius eventually decides to be a guy in a playoff series, and you know, you take a leap that way. It's no Knicks fan, at least in our circle, is like, this is a team that can go to the finals. It's very much like this is a good team that has a chance to, if you get a little lucky, get to the, I don't say conference finals. Zach Lowe has put out there that with a little bit of luck or injury luck, you can get to the conference finals. I very much think the second round is the ceiling on this team, but like the Knicks have been to the second round twice since 2000. So that's not like a terrible place to potentially be, you know? Yeah.
I just think of all these arguments with Knicks fans in the office. There's like, so EJ Stewart, who used to do a Knicks pod, I love EJ, and produces Maggie and Perloff on CBS Sports Radio. He was like, he gets mad about that the Knicks aren't getting enough respect, but then he gets mad that they ask about whether the Knicks can win a championship and why can't they just be good, and why does everybody have to worry about them winning a championship? And like, unfortunately in the NBA, there's only like, once you're in the conversation, that becomes the conversation. Like the entire Joel Embiid has been runner-up for MVP twice and won MVP the last 3 years. That's a pretty outrageous run. And still, the entire conversation with him will be about, is he going to win a championship or not? That's it. Or who are they going to get? Or blah, blah, blah. And the Knicks have put themselves in this situation where a listener of ours wrote like this huge scale of like fan enjoyment. And he said, the number one most enjoyable thing as a fan is when your team is winning, you expected them to be losing, and you expect them to get better in the future. That's like the number one. But once you expect them to start winning and you don't know if they're going to get better in the future, that's when the anxiety and the expectations start. And the Knicks it was a great story last year. Mm-hmm. It was winning the Cleveland series was great. Jalen Brunson was a great story, but now everybody expects them to be good. And then the next question in the NBA always is, okay, well, what else? What's next? What are you going to do? And there's almost no time to enjoy it. I told Thunder fans, like, enjoy this 1 year where no one thought you would be this good. You didn't think you would be this good. No matter what happens in the playoffs, you're going to be thrilled because next year it's fucking over. Like next year, if they win 56 games this year, they're going to be a top 3 title contender next year, whether they win the title or not. And expectation is like sort of the thief of joy as a sports fan. So
that scale and that scenario, I think, is perfect.
Yeah.
I think what I echo EJ's sentiments is that like the only national conversation. Now, maybe this is a national thing and not a local thing. At least I don't feel it's a local thing. But like the Chiron on ESPN last night when the Knicks were on ABC for a game and they just traded for OG Anunoby, we knew exactly what it was going to say. What move will make the Knicks a contender? And then like Steven went up there and did the thing. And it was like, I understand it's supposed to be entertainment.
By the way, they're doing it to the Thunder too. Like,
they're doing it to, like you said, they're doing it to the Sixers too. Like I get it.
It's an NBA. I think it's an NBA sickness. I don't think they're treating the Knicks differently. I think it is different once you get into that realm and you realize, like, wait a minute, what? Like, I'm not allowed to enjoy this. You know?
I think my pushback would only be like, I don't think a lot of Knicks fans think they've entered into the Thunder realm or the Sixer realm. We don't have an Embiid. We don't have an SGA. We recognize what they are, and I think the story is more about how they've overachieved on depth and drafting well and like finding a jewel in Jalen Brunson, and honestly, a jewel in Julius Randle, who was just let go by the Lakers and then let go by the Pelicans. And the fact that they were able to build a team that's good enough to beat a Donovan Mitchell team, like maybe that's easier to beat, but like what the Cavs were last year, number 1 in defense, top 2 in net rating, and then they go out in 5 games to a Knicks team that didn't trade for Donovan Mitchell. Like, that's the story, how the Knicks are overachieving. And the Chiron can't always say, what aren't they? You know? And that's, I think, where the frustration comes.
The Bing Bong guy ruined it for you. That one video.
Shout out Danny. You ruined it, my friend. Okay. Anyway, last question. I promise I'll get you out of here quick because we have families to go get to.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
So the question I do this with every single guest. It's the Mount Rushmore of rivals. Every year, the schedule comes out in the offseason and there's dates you circle. I'm curious if the Knicks fall on it. There hasn't been a lot of Knicks Sixers games to make us rivals, but like I'm curious, the 4 teams that you look forward to playing the most, whether it be just this season or over time, who might they be?
So I think for me personally, this year the Knicks would be on it.
Okay.
For Sixers fans, they are not. So I think
is that a personal because of how your upbringing was?
It's just where I live and what I do. Imagine at your work, it was all Sixers fans.
Yeah.
And they just you'd be intolerable. All you would want to do would be to beat them all day. So
right. I get it.
You know, I think for the Sixers, it is likely the Celtics, the Nuggets, the Heat, and I just want to make sure there's not a Western Conference team that I'm forgetting about. The Celtics, the Nuggets, the Heat, and I guess for lack of another one, I think you would probably just have to say the Bucks.
I was going to say Milwaukee would be the 4th one, I think.
I mean, they've had some great regular season games against Milwaukee that they have not played them in the playoffs yet. It would be it would be a cool series if it were ever to happen. If the Sixers were ever to progress far enough to actually play the Bucks, it would be neat. So I think those would be the four. But me personally, my fourth would be the Knicks.
One follow-up. Who scares you the most of those four teams?
Not the Bucks.
Ooh.
Not the Heat.
Really? Not the Heat?
No.
They could be the 10 seed. I'd be afraid of them, Spike.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have this theory. I don't like Jimmy Butler at all, but I used to have this theory that, and I might even still have it, we'll have to see if they play him again, that there's just no way that Jimmy Butler would lose to the Sixers in the playoffs. Like, there's just no chance. Like, he will he could be 65 years old in the NBA and he will not lose to the Sixers in the playoffs. I think because of how they are made up physically, the Celtics are... I'm not super confident about the Celtics title hopes, though I think it's possible, but there are so many. The Sixers are not a particularly athletic or like long team, but the Celtics are, and they have a lot of guys that can cause trouble for Maxey. Derek White and Jaylen Brown's not a great defender, but he's long, He's
better this year. I'll say that.
I think, and Horford historically has had Embiid's number. So I think it would be the Celtics of those teams.
We right before this, I just finished recording a Patreon pod with Macri, and the number one, we did our power rankings. It's more of a how you feeling rankings rather than an actual contender rankings. And while number one is the Thunder, we feel the best about them. The Celtics are two, and the fact still remains: the number one most unstoppable thing I've seen this year as a lineup is the Celtics starting five. So I'm with you in the sense that like they would scare me the most too. Okay, final question. It's a really quick answer.
Yep.
What does a disappointing season look like for the Sixers? And then we'll wrap up.
So we came into the season, we had this argument with Daryl on the podcast where Mike keeps saying, just get past the second round. And Morey says, well, the object's a title. So what's the difference if we lose in the second round or the conference finals? And it's like, well, the difference is they haven't been past the second round in 20 years.
Right. So just get there.
To me, I think a disappointing season for the Sixers is if they lose in the playoffs and Embiid and Maxey did not run through the finish line. Like, I do not want them to lose in the second round again. But if they lose in the second round and Embiid averages 38, 14 and 7, and like they just didn't have enough, they played the Celtics in the second round or the Bucks in the second round or a good team in the second round, but Embiid was not hurt, did not have a tummy ache, did not mope in the corner for the second half of a deciding game. Like, I just want him to be alive and look like a player that I can believe in. So I think a disappointing end of the season is me seeing that. I just don't want to see that again.
Especially if you're confident in Embiid, like there's no worry of him leaving, right? So then if that's the confidence, the championship isn't as mandatory as it is for teams that have already gone all in,
right? Yes.
Like the Bucks, like the Celtics. Whereas it's weird. This is a credit to Daryl Morey, the way he's been able to kind of reset things a bit. And
pretty good at his job, man. Pretty good. Yeah.
Come to think of it, he might actually know what he's doing.
Yeah.
To an extent,
Now, part of those problems were problems that he caused. So,
if you had the chance, though, like I'm sure you agree with this, like if you had the chance to get out from under the Ben Simmons situation with James Harden, like I can't fully fault you for that, where you turned him into that.
And by the way, the year before, like we were all saying when Houston supposedly wanted Maxey and he said no. Like that wasn't at a time. I think the tone was, we'd like to keep Maxey, but he wasn't untradeable at the time. And the idea that the year before he let the Nets get him and did not give up Maxey and was able to obtain Harden without getting Maxey, I guess you could say. Now it ended the way it ended, but certainly better to. James Harden was certainly more productive than Ben Simmons was going to be at that point. So, especially
at the end of both of their 10 years. So.
For sure.
Spike, thank you so much for joining me for this preview. Look forward to this matchup on Friday night. I believe it's also a national television game as well. Back-to-back primetime slots for the Knicks. Before you get out of here, to anybody that might not know, please tell the fine folks at home where they can find you and all your stuff.
Writes to Ricky Sanchez is the name of the podcast. Writes to RickySanchez.com, and on Twitter I am Spike Eskin. We have a lot of opposing team fans who listen to us for when their team beats us. Celtics fans are famous for us to hear us cry. So after they're done listening to your pod after the game on Friday night, if the Knicks win, you are welcome to listen to us cry about the loss.
We've started to get that too. Heat fans in our live chat after every playoff game last year. It's like, all right, they may not be. They leave early to go comment on our live chat is what happens in Miami.
Well, isn't what Robert Saleh say? If you ain't got no haters, you ain't popping. Is that?
Yeah. Let's not get into the Jets. This will be a much longer podcast. Thank you sincerely. Thank you for joining me, man.
Yeah, of course.